Okay.
So we are now in chapter 12, and we're continuing with the story that comes out of, or the repercussions, the aftermath, should we say, the episodes that come out of the action in the temple. And if you read chapter 12, as I have done this time, coherently with the action in the temple, you can see how each of these small discussions or controversies that Jesus has, they're called controversies, they're each related to what he did in the temple. And you can see, we'll see that as we go through them. In other words, what he did in the temple detonated this furious engagement with Jesus on a number of topics, which indicate that what he did evoked a counter challenge to him. So it would make sense that if Jesus claims his authority over the temple, which is what we said he did by stopping the sacrifices for a significant period, a significant interlude, which was enough to catch people's attention, especially the leaders, then once that, that had to come to an end at some point because he had to go home. Obviously, he had to sleep for the night, so it would have come to an end then at a point. Once that finished, and then he returns to the temple, which we hear in Luke's gospel, he goes to the temple every day during this period to teach, and the people are hanging on his words. It unleashes naturally and understandably this a furious attack against him, because he has claimed authority, and the people agree with his authority. So this is a moment of kind of king-making. It's a moment of access to power on his part, or would be if that's what he was after. But in terms of the people around him who don't necessarily understand what he's doing, he looks very, very dangerous, that he could indeed take over and offer a challenge to their power and position. And so it makes sense that the authorities would attack him. And so all this has, in the rest of chapter 12, I'm reading this, and it's something I've never seen before, really, as directly connected to the episode in the temple, and therefore, in its turn, sustaining what he did in the temple. So if everything is connected to the challenge that he made to the temple, then these episodes that are so connected say that, yes, indeed, he did do something in the temple that was undermining to all the power structure in Jerusalem. And all that serves to tell us how important the episode in the temple was, how determinative it was, which is something that has been swallowed up in the later tradition, and especially if you get to someone like Luke, who reduces it all to one verse and then displaces all the drama to Stephen, to the figure of Stephen and his critique of the whole history of Judaism and the temple. So what Luke is displaying in the Acts of the Apostles is really the tension between the emerging Christian community in Jerusalem in the first decades of Christianity and the temple authorities. And the whole drama with Jesus and the temple authorities is kind of subsumed into that. And so that has become in many ways the dominant attitude to what Jesus did in the temple, and especially when it's interpreted in terms of his difficulty or his opposition to the commercialization, or the supposed commercialization of the temple, rather than hostility or an opposition to his actual sacrificial practice, which I think is much, much more credible, much more radical and grounded in Jesus' own teaching and story, and also resulting in this opposition. Because if he's just concerned about the proper conduct of the temple, rather than its very being, its very essence, then of course people are not going to be all that annoyed. In fact, they might support him. Yes, that this place could do with a cleaning up, and God will be better pleased by a better functioning temple. But that does not seem to be the way. So we have these 4 episodes after the parable of the wicked tenants, which we did last week, and which kind of lays the scene for what Jesus claims to be. He claims to be a beloved son, whom the tenants of the vineyard are deliberately trying to get rid of. So it's a kind of terminal challenge between the two of them. And then there follows these small episodes, one to do with the paying of taxes, one to do with the resurrection, one to do with the greatest commandment, and then one that Jesus offers himself, a controversy that Jesus himself initiates about the nature of David's son, and then finally his commentary on the widow's mite given to the treasury of the temple. So you really have 5 small episodes following this major intervention in the temple functioning. So the first one, question about paying taxes, is chapter 12, verses 13 to 17. And if someone could read that, this is the really highest stakes challenge to Jesus that would be natural, very natural, and very logical after what he did in the temple. This question that is addressed to him. So if someone could read chapter 12, verses 13 to 17. Melanie, off you go, please.
Okay. Later, the leaders sent some Pharisees and supporters of Herod to trap Jesus into saying something for which he could be arrested. "Teacher," they said, "we know how honest you are. You are impartial and don't play favorites. You teach the way of God truthfully. Now tell us, is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or shouldn't we?" Jesus saw through their hypocrisy and said, "Why are you trying to trap me? Show me a Roman coin and I'll tell you." When they handed it to him, he asked, "Whose picture and title are stamped on it?" "Caesar's," they replied. "Well then," Jesus said, "give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God." His reply completely amazed them.
Not surprisingly, because it's a peach of a reply.
Yeah.
Very, very smart. A masterpiece of indirection and double meaning, which catches them entirely off guard. Now, before we get into that, just what is the general context in which this is set up? The very first verse that we just read there. It describes quite in detail.
There's the attempt to trap him.
They tend to trap him. So it says specifically they want to trap him. So this is a very carefully orchestrated and pointed question, like a lawyer in court would ask you a key question that's going to corner you. And who is it that's doing this? Who are the parties involved?
The Pharisees and Herodians.
That's right. It's not just the Pharisees. It's the Herodians. Now, the Herodians were a power in Galilee. They weren't a power in Jerusalem. They would, they would have authority in the temple because the temple was the headquarters of Judaism, and technically Galilee and the territory of Herod were part of Judaism, while the Romans were politically and militarily in control of Jerusalem. Nevertheless, it was the cultural and religious center of Judaism, which extends into Galilee. So somehow or other, the Herodians, and you can bet they were armed, they are entitled to carry arms because they represented the kingdom of Herod. They would have been armed officials, or they could have claimed official authority in the temple. And it says explicitly they came to trap him in order to arrest him. To arrest him, they would have had to been armed in order to keep the crowd at bay. So this is an incredibly dangerous moment for Jesus. They're asking him something that could very easily be interpreted as a declaration of rebellion and insurrection against Caesar. And therefore, they would immediately have had the cause, what do they call it? When the police say they have evident cause or something to arrest Jesus, and to call on the Roman authorities directly as well, who were within basically, a runner's distance, very, very close to the temple, and they could have quelled any riot that would have occurred with the force of Roman arms. It would have been horrendous. And maybe the crowd would have backed off because they were scared of that, and Jesus could have been arrested. So what he said, everything hinged on how he answered this question. If he answered it wrongly, or in any way that gave offense, they had the upper hand. So if he said, on the one hand, yes, it's okay to give taxes to Caesar, he would have directly contradicted the teaching of the law, the Torah, that God gave this land to the people, not to anybody else, and therefore any tax, any levy on the land was an offense to God himself. And so he would have immediately been discredited as any kind of teacher in Israel, certainly any prophetic teacher. But on the other hand, if he said, no, it's not righteous to give taxes to Caesar, he would have been directly accused and arrested as a revolutionary rebel against Roman authority. So it was the most politically charged question probably that Jesus had ever been asked. And it's not by accident, or do you think it's by accident, that it comes directly after the episode in the temple. In other words, what he did in the temple was an offense to the authorities, so they want to get him arrested. It's an offense both in terms of their claim to authority and power, but also in anthropological terms. Because if he stops the sacrifices, which is what he did, then their whole basis of coexistence with Rome has crumbled. Rome is happy with the temple. Why would Rome be happy with the temple? I mean, in terms of the institution of the temple.
Keeps order.
Yeah.
It keeps order.
Yeah.
How does it keep order? What's this mechanism?
Well, for one thing, I mean, from a Gerardian perspective, it discharges violence.
Yes, exactly right.
Control.
So, I mean, like every temple sacrifices animals, which is violence. You know, you're killing animals all the time. And the Jerusalem temple was probably one of the most high functioning temples in the world. It would be unlikely that anywhere bar kind of imperial, someplace in Rome maybe on occasions would have as many sacrificial victims as they were in Jerusalem. So it was the height of sacrificial activity in the known world at that time. And if Jesus stops that, he interferes with the world as it stands, with the actual political and cultural world as it stands. It's not a trivial action on Jesus' part at all. So it's not unnatural then that they should invoke the power of Caesar on their side. So the temple says, actually, the temple authorities and the Herodians, who are colleagues or allies of Roman power, they directly challenge Jesus because they're trying to reassert the order of sacred violence. Rome represents that in a brutal form, a brutal imperial form, but Jerusalem represents it in its oldest, archaic, sacrificial, and historical Jewish form. So there's an alliance between these two, and they come to get Jesus on the basis of that alliance. And Jesus survives because of the cleverness of his answer. Simply that. How does he answer? What does he actually say? Or do? He does something first before he answers. And that's very important.
Asks
Sorry?
for a coin. He
Asks for a coin. So he directly, that's what a magician would do.
Yeah.
He would move your attention somewhere else. And Jesus does that more than once. He does it with a woman taken in adultery. He starts writing on the ground, and there's another really tense moment where someone's going to get killed, and he changes the direction of attention. So that's the first thing he's done. So what is a coin? What is the cultural actuality or nature of a coin?
This one was Roman.
It's Roman.
It has the image of the emperor on it.
It has the image, the icon. In the Greek, it's the icon, EIKON, from where we get the word icon. It has the image of Caesar on it. But any coin, any element of money has sacred violence built into it. If you look at the dollar note in America, it has all these weird, which I've never really inquired into, but it has all these weird Masonic symbols on it. A temple and an eye and other stuff, you know, in God we trust. It's just loaded with sacred symbolism. Why is that? Go ahead. Why would a coin, in England, we have the Queen, or God forgive, the Queen is dead. God, long live the King. That we had the Queen or the King on, or we did have when I was in England, on the coin, and just the head, just the same thing. The Queen is or the King are sacred objects. You know, they're the sacred focus of the nation. And America is a republic, so they can't have a king's head on the coin. They do have the presidential head now, and that doesn't matter. I suppose it has the same function, but the dollar note doesn't do that. It has the temple and the eye and all the other stuff, rigmarole. Why is that the case? it's because money is a fiction. Money is a total figment. You know, actual currency is a figment, but people believe in it. It works. If I have dollar bills in my pocket, people are going to accept it for whatever I want to buy. And it's the same for Australian dollars, anything, British pounds, anything. Because the if you think about it, where money comes from, it's just the actual phenomenon of currency, of coins. Many times, I don't think always, but many times they're related to temples. Temples issue them, or they act as in the case of Jerusalem, as kind of like exchange centers for coinage. And the coins that temples or the sacred tokens that temples issued acted as kind of surety, or as a kind of blessing first thing. Unless you follow through with this deal, whatever the deal is, the bartering deal is, the coin will act as something that's going to invoke a curse on you, and if you do follow it through, then you can get rid of it and hand it on. I mean, I think that is one of the origins of coinage or currency. In other words, it has a sacred function in demanding from you. If you think about it, according to in a mimetic theory, if you have something, I want it. But in a sacred system, there are rules by which I can get it and take it from you, and you will give it to me. So there's the mediation of an economy through the control of the sacred, and the coin very much operates as the token, the emblem, the what would you call it? What's the word for a kind of a talisman? The talisman of the power that's mediating that exchange without violence, because there's violence built into the coin. And I think, I mean, that's an analysis I just presented. People might argue with it, but I think you know, from a Girardian perspective, it makes a lot of sense that coins themselves have sacred, violent character. And so when Jesus picks up he says, show me a denarius, show me a Roman coin, he's immediately taking into his hand a token of sacred violence and of Roman violence. He says, show it to me. So now the focus has all gone from Jesus as a potential rebel and revolutionary, and it's gone to the I would say idolatrous character of the coin that the Jewish people instinctively have a feeling for, if not just simply because of the representation of the image which they're forbidden to have by the second commandment. So Jesus suddenly holds up to them the reality of sacred violence, i.e. Roman imperial power. And so he's thrown the question back to them in terms of the context which they all are in and have to some degree accept, even though they hate it. And 30 years later, we're going to have a massive rebellion against. So he shifts the emotions away from himself to the reality of what this coin represents. So it's a masterstroke of indirection. And then what does he say? What does he actually verbally say?
Give to Caesar what is Caesar's.
Give to
and
Caesar.
God what is God's.
What does that mean? Once he's kind of he's located the primary meaning of this thing in their sensibilities. They know what it is. And he refers to the inscription and to the image. He's actually holding up an alien idolatrous symbol. And he says, give it back to Caesar. That's all. Caesar projected this in the first place. He gave it out. Give it to him, because actually it is his. It comes from him. It belongs to him according to God having set up his own image. I mean, like it also says at the beginning of the Bible that human beings were made in the image of God, and that's the same word in the Greek, the icon. So there's a kind of theological sense in it, in giving it back to Caesar, and then give to God what is God's. Go ahead, Claire.
Can you I started to think of that as, when you were saying that, Tony, as a bit like turning the other cheek. Don't participate in it, give it back. Or, like not back as though we're participating in it, but giving it back in terms of don't get into this.
Yeah.
Game.
Don't invest in it in any way. Don't invest your heart or emotions, your reality in it. Give it back to the man from whom it came. And I think you're entirely right. It's the same thing as turning the other cheek. It's separating yourself from the system. If you're in conflict with somebody and they strike you, well, then you're immediately mimetically engaged. You're tightly bound, and someone's got to get hurt. But if you disengage and by presenting the other cheek, then you diffuse that whole human reality, and that's exactly what he's done. He's deconstructed the reality of money and taxation right there. Go ahead, Gail.
But it's really clever in the sense that what he is saying basically is it's a way of resisting the empire as it exists, and yet allowing you to live peacefully within it.
It's amazing. It's totally amazing.
So it's a double act, one of rebellion and the other not of submission.
No.
But of surviving nonviolently.
It is both radical and pragmatic at the same time. It both subverts everything and says, yet we still will continue to live within this system. So it's amazingly subversive. It's doubly subversive because it's pragmatic. You're not going to start slaughtering Roman soldiers or leading rebellion. Give back to Caesar this image. Show me this icon and the inscription. So he deconstructs in terms of semiotics what the human interchange meaning is. Dan.
It reminds me of the controversy that the disciples put before Jesus to solve some dispute about their financial affairs. And Jesus is asked to reconcile these two men who I think are Jews, but unable to reconcile their rivalry or their conflict. And Jesus refuses to play the role of an arbiter or a judge.
He does, yeah. So what does that suggest about his general practice in terms of the system of violence and sacred violence? How does he deal with that?
I think also the fact that he asks for a coin, he kind of the fact that they bring the coin out, so that he kind of wrongfoots everyone who tries to say that they're more righteous or that they have some claim to righteousness. The fact that they actually are holding a coin,
yeah, right,
automatically puts them in the they're already sort of labeled with the taint of the
I mean,
violence in the
technically,
coin.
it shouldn't be in the temple in the first place. I mean, it would be that they wouldn't allow. They had Tyrian coinage, which apparently was acceptable because it didn't have graven images on it. So to have a graven image inside the temple was a blasphemy. So it, exactly as you say, it's wrong-footed, and surprising that somebody had it. Probably because people didn't take them as a huge crowd there. You couldn't. They didn't have metal detectors in those days. You couldn't figure out whether anybody had a Roman coin on them. But he does. He wrong-foots everybody. So. I'm just as the passage itself says at the end, and they were utterly amazed. It says they were completely amazed at him. It's just a stunning piece of footwork, of mental agility and semiotic footwork. You know, to redirect. I mean, he would have been a great lawyer if put it in those terms. Anyway, Cheryl.
So was this happening in the temple?
Hard to tell.
Well, there you go. I'm not entirely sure. That you know, I didn't. I'm getting this from Luke. It doesn't say in Mark that he's in the temple, but in Luke,
He's in the temple in Mark in 27.
Sorry.
He's in the temple in Mark in verse 27 when he comes back to Jerusalem, and he's in the temple and his authorities, and he talks about the parable of the wicked tenants.
Yeah, right.
I think
yes, there is a continuity there.
Gone
But
and
in sorry,
he's gone and come back.
yeah. But actually,
I had never read this story as taking place in the temple, so that the image in the temple that's a new idea to me.
Yeah, well, it says in Luke chapter 21, directly after the same basic episode in Mark of the shutting down the temple of sacrifice, it says, verse 37, every day he was teaching in the temple, and at night he would go out and spend the night on the Mount of Olives, as it was called. And all the people would get up early in the morning to listen to him in the temple. So Luke, I mean, it is adding a little bit, although as whoever it was said that he in continuity he is in the temple in Mark, but in Luke it says plainly every day he's in the temple. So
that's where he's teaching.
And that's where his teaching is. Yeah, go ahead, Melanie.
I'll try not to take too long here, but just over 20 years ago, I was a ministry student, and I spent 4 months in Argentina. And, you know, Argentina and Britain have not gotten along in I don't know how many years, but they're
my goodness,
not happy. So anyway, I had brought some Canadian coins, and we were somewhere. And so I was giving these Canadian coins out to the children. And Marcelo, the minister, he looks at the coin and he says, well, who's that? And I said, well, that's Queen Elizabeth. And you would not believe the tantrum he threw. Like, he could not believe that Canada would have a picture of the Queen. Like, so I get this, you know, like, I really think Jesus went for an emotional level there, you know, that in some way. Because, like, it just, you know, in the by that time, it was the 21st century. And, you know, and it just absolutely shocked me.
You're absolutely right. I mean, there's nothing like the image and the powerful image of your enemy to get you annoyed.
Yeah. It was embarrassing, but you know, because well, we don't, you know, like we don't listen to them if they get on the line, you know.
I know, but you do have their image on the coin. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, that's right.
Gail and then Cheryl.
Tony, I think he is in the temple in Mark.
Okay.
If you look at 11:27, Again, they came to Jerusalem. As he was walking in the temple, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders came to him. And then they start again testing him. And it goes through the parable of the wicked tenants. And then in 12:12, when they realized that he had told this parable against them, they wanted to arrest him, but they feared the crowd. So they left him and went
Yeah,
away.
right. Yeah.
And then he goes on, then they sent him some Pharisees, so I don't see that he's left.
No, so definitely the overall context suggests very strongly that he's in the temple.
Yeah.
And then the Lucan passage, which is where I'm basically getting this from, states it plainly that he is in the temple. So this is a temple controversy. Is a controversy taking place in the temple, and just as Linda says, the very existence of the coin in the temple would wrong foot everybody. But it's not at all implausible that someone would have carried a coin in, even one of his own disciples. You never know. He just give me a coin. Go on, Cheryl.
So one of the things I've been thinking of, maybe it's on the wrong track completely, is there is a separation here. Caesar hadn't yet been declared to be divine, I think, until like 40 AD. But what he was saying, give to Caesar what's Caesar's and give to God what's God's, he's clearly saying, well, Caesar isn't God either. I mean,
No,
there
of
is
course,
that.
yes. Yeah.
So
Oh,
there's
yeah,
just a
that's
little
right.
something that's there.
Yeah. I mean, and you're right. Augustus is declared son of the divine Caesar when he's I don't know what point in his reign, but his reign finishes in 28. So it's all around that period. I mean, like it's a movie. Apparently, in Rome itself, they resisted calling the Caesars divine. I mean, naturally so. I mean, because they were a republic, and they didn't want that. But apparently, in Asia Minor, and this is one of the reasons why places like Ephesus were so dangerous for Christian preaching, is that they did have the cult of the divine emperor in the period after Jesus, in the 50s. And the Christians ran into that and got into big trouble there because of that. Then that's one of the interpretations of the book of Revelation, the 7 letters, and the trials and tribulations of those cities all on that coast, and both, I think, Smyrna and Ephesus had cults of the divine emperor. So it was all rising up at that time. But you're right, it hasn't been completely declared, and Jesus is making a very obvious separation, which is very important for Christianity. You see, as it goes through those first 300 years, it never really gave in. Well, not really. It never did give in to the divine emperor. And so it had a certain secularism to it, and therefore ultimately greater historical promise to it than the kind of like rise and fall of different god emperors, Gail.
Well, that's pretty much what I was going to say, that my text itself, and points out that this reference to give to Caesar doesn't specify Augustus. So it really applies to any emperor. And for Mark's readers, it's again a distinction emphasizing that Caesar is not God.
Oh, yeah, right.
That God is separate.
Yes, yeah. And what is due to Caesar is not some mythic imperial levy, because it's the divine glory of Rome. It's just the image of this man who happens to be in power.
Yeah.
And we'll go along to get along, but this is not the truth. The truth is somewhere else. So it's absolutely brilliant, and Mark has saved that right there for that moment directly after the episode in the temple, and I mean, you could feel their position crumble. And people repeat that phrase again and again, and they give it a sense of, you know, the separation of church and state, you know, and okay, yes, I mean that's one possible reading, but I think it's more radical than that. It's not just that we have two spheres of power. I mean, you have Jesus transforming the very basis of what it means to be human, taking all the violent sacred out of it. So it's packed with subversion. So after that comes another episode. If we can get through these, it'll be a miracle because they're so dense, you know, and so full of stuff. So if we read 12, 18 through to 27, if someone's got that, chapter 12, 18 through to 20. And thank you for all your interventions on that. That was a rich discussion. I loved it. It was wonderful. Thank you.
I can read it.
Yes, please.
Some Sadducees who say there is no resurrection came to him and asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no child, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. There were 7 brothers. The first married, and when he died, left no children. And the second married the widow and died, leaving no children. And the third likewise. None of the 7 left children. Last of all, the woman herself died. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, Is not this the reason you are wrong? That you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God? For when they raise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And so, for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the story about the bush, how God said to him, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is God not of the dead, but of the living. You are quite wrong.
So rather than a smart answer, he just gives them a flat slap down. You're wrong. So now we've had the Pharisees and the Herodians ganging up. Now, who is it that asked this question?
The Sadducees.
The Sadducees. And who are the Sadducees, as much as we know?
The priestly caste.
They're the priestly caste. They're the high priestly families and the ones attached to them who represent the power structure connected to the temple and basically the wealthy of Jerusalem. They're the ruling class of Jerusalem. They're not the Pharisees. The Pharisees are an educated scribal class. Some of them may have been wealthy, but their essence was their education and the position they took in terms of the law, and therefore vis-a-vis violence in the world. They separated themselves out by their ritual behavior. The Sadducees didn't do that. They were related to the temple, and they didn't believe in resurrection. Now, why is it possibly the case that the Sadducees, who represent the temple, have no regard for resurrection?
Well, they're like the powerful people. So maybe they don't really want to change society because it's pretty good for them.
Yeah.
They're pretty good the way things stand. They're going to have a long, satisfied life, and they don't want. I mean, just on almost a pop cartoonish level, they don't want things to be, they don't want the order of things to be rocked, even by the thought that there could be a resurrection and a change in the order. Go ahead, Gail.
Well, and they are the final judges then.
They are the final judges. They would control the Sanhedrin, no doubt about it. And they're the
Also,
judges of,
so go ahead.
sorry,
go
let me
ahead.
finish. They're the judges of what in what area would you say they were judging? They were the judges of doctrinal truth. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so well,
Right.
it's a religious law.
Yeah, therefore they would have had authority. You're right, because they represent the temple. They would their word would carry a lot of weight,
Mhm.
and they're such a ridiculous crew. Anyway, we'll get to that. But they annoy me more than the Pharisees. But anyways, okay. Go on, Dan.
They're fundamentalists. They don't accept the anything that wasn't in the
Yes,
Torah.
in the Torah. That's right. The 5 books. Yes, that's right. That's another aspect. It's much better than, and who do they keep out that way? They keep out the prophets. It's basically just the first 5 books of the Bible. They're fundamentalists in a very exclusive kind of non. They don't believe in the prophetic tradition, which is pretty amazing, really. But it would again fit their kind of sociological profile that they have no truck with that. Prophets are always disturbing things. Linda.
Well, first of all, 2 points. One is that the resurrection only came online just pretty recently, about a couple hundred years, wasn't it? Like in Book of Daniel. So
Yeah,
it's a
really,
relatively
yeah.
new thing, and the Sadducees come across very reactionary, traditional, like Dan's saying, that they are very kind of pared it down to the tradition. So anything new is going to seem like it's, they're going to naysay it anyway. But the second thing I was going to say more is that the whole point of sacrifice is based on fear.
Yeah.
It's based on fear and the awe of terror of God. Basically, the wrath of God. It's all to do with pushing that away. So then if you start talking about resurrection, then there's a different kind of authority at play, that their own power diminishes. So if people might be too scared to go against the temple or whatever, because they would be condemned, or the wrath of God would fall on them. But then if you're talking about resurrection, there's a whole other dynamic in play, that you can die and still be raised.
That
Do you
is,
know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, and that is so
The power of
important.
the power of death and the power of the violence of the temple is automatically diminished if you accept resurrection.
Exactly right. It's like the coin itself, the sacred ore of the temple is deconstructed by Jesus, firstly by his action there, definitely stopping the sacrifice in his own person, claiming that he has this direct relationship with God, and he's inviting people into it. And then by his general teaching, and then what he says specifically about resurrection, which we'll get to, that it's the character of God to make resurrection. That's basically his argument, that you don't know what you're talking about, you guys. You don't know the scripture, and you don't know God. You don't know that's the character of God to raise the dead. And that's basically what Jesus is saying. And so exactly as you say, Linda, that once you've presented that alternative to the awe-inspiring structure of the temple based on God's wrath, now the Pharisees didn't have that, but they still didn't know how to deal with the world's violence. because except through these purity codes, but the temple was locked right back there in the archaic sacred, and Jesus and resurrection completely undermines that, because that death and violence are not the final point of reference for human meaning. You don't have to, as you say, you don't have to be terrified of that anymore, because God is the God of resurrection, and if you've got that relationship, you don't need the temple. So you can see how the teaching of the resurrection is directly, really out of what you're saying, is directly in contradiction to the temple. Resurrection and temple do not exist. And that is why the veil of the temple is ripped the moment Jesus dies. I mean, the whole temple apparatus is undone in the cross and the resurrection that's going to come from it. So you can see the power of these episodes, you know, like it's like an earthquake, that Jesus is bringing this earthquake to Jerusalem. And the first thing he does to unlock the earthquake is the action in the temple, and then the teaching that comes afterwards. Cheryl.
So yeah, so maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but it's such a short little story, and it starts out with this tricky question about who she's going to be married to from people who do not believe in the resurrection anyway. So
Yeah, right.
that's their and it ends with this: I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, which goes back to the first 5 books. I mean, he's talking to them in their language.
Yeah.
He's not the God of the dead,
Yes,
but of
he
the
is. That's a
living.
good point. Yeah.
That anyway, so he's saying that what I'm reading here is that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are all alive right now.
Yeah.
Because he's the God of the living,
Right.
they were at least alive at the time of the burning bush. So, I find this little short section just confusing. Actually, it's like, what is he really saying? What is he saying? Except I mean, and is he saying that when we rise again, we're going to be like angels? So we're the angels resurrected,
First of all, he has to deal with the stupid question that the Sadducees ask him.
Right.
It's so pedantic and prosaic, like they say, well, if you take the law, that the Levirate law, that if a man dies without offspring, in order to preserve his legacy, in physical legacy in terms of the land, the next of kin must raise children for him by the widow. So that then they prolong that to 7 times, so which is, like a biblical kind of like final number of. So that they basically go on through all the time, like she's married so many people that you've lost count. And then when the resurrection comes, tell me, whose wife is she going to be? So, I mean, first of all, it's like, is asking for someone to say, well, you've got it wrong about the nature of relationships in the resurrection. I mean, obviously that's the obvious answer. And Jesus is kind of slightly, but actually it's very interesting from one perspective to see how earthy the concept of resurrection is. It just repeats everything that we're in now, except in the risen state, and so they didn't see it as another plane of reality, a platonic other world. They didn't see it; they just see this world all over again. But Jesus does translate it by saying, "Well, you've got it wrong." Because there's no marriage or giving in marriage, because they're like the angels. And the angels, of course, are servants of God who are completely in relationship with God and with the reality of God. There's no separation between them and God. And so, I mean, but Jesus is saying that the nature of our relationships, or this is the way I would read it, Cheryl, is the nature of our relationships at that point are very different. And if you think about it, like marriage between individuals, is important for the generation of the human species. You've got to have parents giving birth to children and new generations. But in the resurrection, presumably there's no need for that anymore. That's over with. It's the end of history, and it's the culmination of history. And so the relationships that we're in are not determined by the need for generation for new physical generations. They're determined by relationship with God and with each other. So and Jesus, of course, in his way, he makes everything very simple. He says, we're like the angels. So he disabuses them of their pedantry about who's going to get married, and he says, you don't. Any Pharisee, basically, I'm sure, could have given the same answer, basically the same answer. They must have come across it. They must have come across that argument before. But the Sadducees, because they're a conservative class, they cannot think new thoughts. They think old thoughts, and so they're locked in that old way of thinking. But then Jesus goes beyond, like you say, and he says, as for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses? So this is the bit you're talking about, in the story about the bush, how God has said, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So these are words addressed to Moses. So at that point, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are dead, historically. But Jesus is using the simple statement by God, as you say, from those books, from the books of the Torah, that I am, present tense, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the way Jesus reads that is not in kind of literary terms that, this is what God would say in a rhetorical fashion about his character. He's the permanent one, and human beings die and are born and die, and they pass away. Jesus expands in his interpretation the present existence of God to all those God is in relationship with. In other words, being in relationship with the God that Jesus is in relationship with, his Father, is a present tense, deathless thing. That's what Jesus is saying. He says, you don't know the scriptures nor the power of God. So when he talks about the power of God, he's talking about the nature of God. God is not a distant, isolated or conceptual thing. This is a relationship that he has, and he says that everybody in that relationship is alive, and that's what gives me hope and confidence in the resurrection. I mean, that answer from Jesus does give me a lot of hope and confidence, because when God introduces himself as I am in that conversation in the burning bush, he talks about this absolute presence, this absolute, there's no really other word for it. I'm not talking about a state, an eternal state. That's our kind of objectivizing way of thinking, but that this is a relationship I have with you now. So I'm saying, God is saying to Moses, I am with you in every circumstance. That's what he says. You got to go to Egypt and set the people free. That's an impossible task. Like going to Jerusalem for Jesus is an impossible task. But don't worry, I am. And that's what he said. That's what Jesus says to the disciples in the boat. Do not fear, I am. It's in the Greek, ego eimi, I am. So this absolute present tense relationship of God, and that is the nature of the relationship with God that Jesus communicates. And there's that's when he says, before Abraham was, I am, he's talking about that relationship before the world was founded, and that will occur afterwards. So what, I mean, in short, Cheryl, what he's talking about is relationship
Yeah,
or
because
relation.
I mean the very verb to be, I am. If there's an I, you're only an I really if you're in relationship to another. Otherwise, you just are. I mean, you
Yeah.
just. I mean,
That's
you don't
right.
even need to have an I am.
That's right.
It's to have that verb to be is already differentiating yourself from the other. I am.
Absolutely, Linda.
So
Absolutely.
I am. So, and
You
then
can't
if he
have an
says,
I without another.
really, yeah, because otherwise it would just be a blanket kind of
Yes, that's right.
thing, like presence. But if
yes.
you are an I, you said that's a personal first person pronoun.
Yeah.
So you only need that if you want to enter into relationship with a you or a they
Yes.
or we or whatever. So
Yeah.
the fact that he does that and he says, I am to Moses, and he says, I am the God of Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he's saying to Moses that he is the I am for each of those. So in a way, the resurrection, it doesn't depend on whether the resurrection comes from God.
Yes.
God is the one who initiates it because he initiates that relationship, and we get pulled into his life in the
Very good.
resurrection
Yeah.
through that relationship.
Thank you, Linda. Gail.
Well, and that was beautiful, Linda. I just want to say I see this as, and am I wrong in seeing this as a radical statement about gender?
Oh well, that too.
Yes, and isn't it a pity how the patriarchal has missed it all these years?
Say some more, Gail, about that, please.
If in heaven there is
Oh, I get what you're talking about now. Yeah. Right, good.
no male or female,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
or whatever, if there's no gender, basically.
No, there's no gender.
There's no giving of, like, marriage in that time for sure would have been a transaction where
Yes,
women were the commodity. So there's
yeah.
no giving or taking of the wives. Then it's because that's. I mean, I think what he's talking about is deep connectedness and relationship with God and with each other, and you can have soulmates or whatever within or without outside of marriage, and that's a different.
That's right. I mean, I think that from say biological perspective, that if there's no giving or taking in marriage, it's because there's no need for generation anymore. There's no need for another species, another generation of the species. So gender becomes irrelevant.
It absolutely. And it seems to me if we're trying to fashion a world in which we live by that kingdom being now, and we see as God sees and lives in a Jerusalem, as in Revelation, that brings that idea of heaven right to earth.
Yeah.
That's how we should be living. And this whole dispute, these culture wars are futile. And the idea that a pope has to be male because Jesus was male, it drives me crazy.
I'm surprised you're not completely insane.
Well, I mean, as a woman, I deeply object to the way
well, yeah,
a modicum of this or that idea fundamentalists proclaim that this and that is all immoral and wrong, and yet ignore something as blatantly destructive of this construct that has oppressed so many people.
Yeah, that's right. That is right. So say that bit about the New Jerusalem again, please. That last bit there that I didn't follow. about the Jerusalem coming to earth,
the new
the heavenly
Jerusalem is brought to earth. The kingdom is now, I mean, in Revelation, the new Jerusalem is on this earth. It is not
Right.
in heaven.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I get you.
That
So
represents the way we should be living.
yeah. So in other words, if it's going to come to earth, it's the future of the earth, and we should be living it now.
And we should be living it now. We are
that's wonderful too. That's great. That is absolutely right. And so you see the enormous kind of nuclear content in these small passages that only come after he's undermined the temple. I mean, that's the break. Dan, please.
This also represents a rewriting of the third chapter of Genesis, where we learn that because of the sin of Adam and Eve, we will return to the ground from which we're taken, for your dust, and to dust you shall return. This whole judgment appears to be really subverted by Jesus' different vision of resurrection. And
yeah. So
you're saying God's power is not limited by that understanding of Genesis, that we may return to the earth, but that's not the end of our story in relationship to God. And
so in other words, the resurrection undoes the curse of Adam.
Yes.
Yeah, because the curse comes from them eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they're expelled from the garden because God is fearful that they will eat from the tree of life and have eternal life. Endless life. So actually, resurrection is allowing people to eat from the tree of life. So it is that full circle thing.
And eating from it knowingly. I mean, beforehand, and the whole point of the knowledge of good and evil is the coming of knowledge, which is the coming of fullness of relationship. It's not a childish thing anymore. You're going to opt for it. You're opting for it with a grown humanity.
And eating from the tree of life is to become like, God is saying, and then they will be like us.
Yeah, right.
And yet God actually through Jesus freely offers the fruit of
the whole reading that we did of Genesis at that point is that Genesis basically 1 to 11 is very ironic. It's talking about God with a big tongue in cheek. Is this really the character of God? That he's scared that we're going to become equal
I
to
understand, but I'm saying that Jesus reveals that the God is truly one who wants us.
I totally
desires
agree.
for us to enter into that relationship. And when he says, chapters 1 through 11, 3 through 11 in or 2 through 11 in Genesis, that if they eat from the fruit of the tree of life, that's not good because they'll be like us. It's actually in resurrection we do enter into relationship, direct, intimate relationship with God. So we are like God in that way. We enter into the same status as the Son of God.
It says at the end of chapter 1, which is like a preface. He says, and in their image he made them. So God is not that we're falsely in competition with God or falsely wanting to be the same as God. We are imprints and likenesses of God's nature and character. So it's entirely correct that we want to be in the same in relationship with that. So
we get pulled into the Trinity, and so we become part of the quadernity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to go back to this thing they talked about, this legalistic thing about the wife having to marry these 7 brothers, whether she even likes them. But what if she did have a child, and then, so the child, who does the child belong to? Who is the father of that child? Is it the first husband who died? Or is it the 5th husband who finally had a child? And if it belongs to the first husband who died, he's raising up a child for the dead brother. How does he love that child? Everything in that whole awful story is just so transactional. And not only is the woman a commodity, the children are a commodity.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so you have a child that is being raised in a family in which they're saying, well, really, your father was that dead man that you will never meet. And this man just sort of impregnated the woman for that man. And it just is it's an ugly scenario, in my opinion. It's just like, oh, really?
It's rendered ugly by the use that is put to by those Sadducees. I mean, in the initial instance, the point was that the tribe and the clan, the family would not die out. And I mean, you're thinking at a very, very primitive level, primal level, because this is a small group in a very threatening world, and the idea is that they should survive in order to flourish and actually bring God's law to everybody. So, and it's not unnatural that something like that would, because you're not talking about a class system that preserves itself. You're talking about a tribal society that could easily get wiped out.
But again, if you believe in resurrection, there's no need for that anymore,
No, there
because
isn't. But
then if the person who died is still alive and still present in the group in some way, just like when the people we know that have died still remain with us and are present to us.
But I mean, that's why I say that any power group are going to use awful arguments. I mean, any power structure, the arguments they use are so uncaring. I remember when I was a student for the priesthood, what my superior, whom I kind of liked in many ways, he always talked about human nature, about there's not much you can do about things because that's human nature. And I was always thinking to myself, that is such a stupid argument, because the whole point of the scripture is to enter into our human nature to change it. If you say we're damned, we're doomed with this thing until we get to heaven, you're just wiping out the vitality and the meaning of Christianity. But he always said it, and I thought, why don't you just shut up?
May I ask something? What did they do when they ran out of kin?
Look, let's get hung up on this. On the Sadducees should not determine this discussion. I mean, of course, it's a legalistic argument, exactly as Cheryl says. And legalism is not to be trusted, like it's always trying to catch you out. And Jesus sidesteps it. He sidesteps it first with this brilliant kind of indirection. Then he sidesteps it with the nature of God and relationship with God, as Linda so well explained there. But I just want to get onto this last one, this last bit here, because it kind of completes the circle about the temple. So let's read this. We don't have much time left, but let's read this chapter 12, verses 28 to 34. So we're looking at chapter 12, 28 to 34.
I could read it.
One of the
Yes,
scribes came near and heard
go
them
ahead.
disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, he asked him, "Which commandment is the first of all?" Jesus answered, "The first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." Then the scribe said to him, You're right, teacher, you have truly said that he is one, and besides him there is no other, and to love him with all the heart and with all the understanding and with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself, this is much more important than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You're not far from the kingdom of God." After that, no one dared to ask him any question.
So this caps off this series of interchanges about basically Jesus' teaching and his authority, but this time it's slightly different. What is different about it? Who is the interlocutor here?
Scribes, and they're not trying to trick him.
No, that's right. They're not. This guy seems really to want to know, which also would make sense. In if there's a crowd, there's got to be scribes there who, and we know from the Acts of the Apostles towards the end, that many priests were converted to Christianity in the first decades. It's kind of surprising. Many of the priestly families, so that would include scribes. So Jesus' teaching was very attractive. So what does the scribe ask? He says, "What commandment is the first of all?" So if you've got a whole bunch of laws, and there were 619 laws that have been isolated, individual laws isolated in the Torah, why would you ask for which is the most important? What's the instinct there?
Capitalism.
Hierarchy.
How do we consolidate power?
It's a hierarchy of laws.
It is a hierarchy of laws, that's right. But in this instance, I think this guy is trying to get this thing simplified. I mean, maybe that's a possibility that he. So there's a sense that I would like this whole thing to be boiled down to something simple. And of course, we all want that. You tell me what I have to do in if you've gone beyond 15 words, it's too much. I mean, I'm always running into that because I'm always talking far too much. And you can't help say the wrong thing when you talk too much. But anyway, this is an important answer that Jesus gives. Jesus does answer him. And so how does Jesus answer this guy? I want it all boiled down, right? I don't want to know about all these rules and regulations. So it's basically an anti-Pharisaical position. He doesn't want a whole bunch of things that he has to do. He just wants one simple thing to do. So it's a quest for spiritual simplicity and spiritual truth. And so how does Jesus answer that quest from this particular guy in these circumstances in the temple?
You love God with all yourself, and you love your neighbor as yourself.
Right. So that's his answer. Claire, what'd you say?
I just much the same thing. It seems to be boiled down to love. Just that
Right.
one love.
Right.
love.
Now we're used to that. We're used to the great command, the golden rule. But Jesus is enunciating this in very critical circumstances. This is not some guy sitting under a beautiful plane tree somewhere, or dressed in white and talking to a host of adoring disciples. He's up against the wall, but he gets a question that he answers succinctly and in a form that can easily be repeated. So the love commandment that he enunciates here comes from the scripture. It comes from two parts of the scripture, both in Deuteronomy. But he puts them together. To love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole soul, your strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And the second is like the first, and the second here in Mark doesn't say like the first, which you get, I think, in Matthew. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. As he puts those together. So what Jesus does, he doesn't invent these summaries of the law. There are two of them that he puts together. One is render unto God what is God, that is your whole life. But at the same time, love your neighbor as yourself. So what has Jesus done out of his tradition in answering this question? What has he done by putting those two things together?
Is he showing that sort of relationality between, loving your God will sort of means that you love your neighbor and yourself, that they just
as yourself.
Right, so the three bits are there.
Yes. There's God, as what Linda was saying about the I am. Actually, just reminded me, I wanted to say, I just saw on YouTube, I recommend you Googling it or looking up on YouTube. Richard Burton asked what was the greatest poem in the English language. And he says, it's the verb to be. And he goes through the verb to be, I am, you are, he, she is, etc. But he reads it with his voice, as they say, it's like a cello in the depth of a mine. And he has this incredible voice, and he makes the conjugation of the verb to be sound utterly beautiful. It is. It's moving. Because you put all those together. It's what Linda was doing, actually. I am, you are, he is, she is, all the rest of it, and so Jesus says you are to love your neighbor as you love yourself. At the same time, in the same measure as, in as much as you love yourself. Now, how much do you love yourself? Anybody can answer.
Usually not well.
Claire, you don't love yourself?
Well, I'm thinking, isn't that the common value for most people?
Oh, not well. You mean to say?
Most people don't love themselves.
Sorry?
I was thinking it's possibly most people don't love themselves. And even the ones who look as though they do, I think that's part of their problem. They're so needy and wounded. They're not full people.
That is true. We don't love ourselves. Why don't we love ourselves? In the sense that you're talking about.
I think it's because we don't love God. We've got nothing really to ground ourselves.
Right. That's why you have to put the two together. That's important. But we're also told. Go ahead.
We see ourselves in comparison to others. This particular commandment is the antidote to mimetic rivalry.
Yes.
And so as we learn to love God, I think we also learn to love ourselves.
Yeah, right.
And then we will love others like we love ourselves. But because we always see ourselves in this mimetic system in comparison to others, we are never good enough, or we're better than everyone else, or it's skewed one way or the other. The violent mimetic system does not allow for us to see things clearly, and least of all ourselves. But when Jesus gives this commandment, it's this simple commandment, it is the antidote to all of that.
and we see
Absolutely, Cheryl. Thank you. So,
we love
yeah, go on, Sheila, please.
and we love God in the other.
Say that we will love God in and as the other.
In the other.
In the other. That's right. It is setting up that absolute relationship of love. By putting those two things together, it's so powerful. Now, one of the reasons why we don't love each other, as Cheryl just said, and I'm just going to repeat basically what she says, is that we compare ourselves to each other and we feel inferior, or we feel in competition, that we have to outdo somebody or whatever. But still, even in that relationship, we put ourselves first. Even though we might feel bad about ourselves, we are still striving to be first. To be the most, the self is an important thing. You know, each human self is a miracle. You know, I don't know how we get to be. If you take a dog, for example, dogs will, and any animal will defend their lives, and it's important they do. And some animals are solitary, some are pack animals, but none has this kind of incredible sense of self that a human being has. And if you see little children, they have this incredible sense. So human beings are very, very powerful for their sense of self. And what Jesus is I think one aspect of what he's saying is that sense of self is important. You don't want to get rid of it. No. It's not a bad thing. It's the image that we're talking about. But you have to love the other's sense of self as much as you love your own. So each person has the same sense of self as you do, and they may feel very bad about themselves. They may actually have a terrible life, but they still have that self. And so you're asked to credit to the other the same love. You're supposed to give from yourself the same love for that self as you have for yourself. Now, even as I say that, I know how difficult or impossible that is, and yet at the same time, how immensely attractive it is. Is what Cheryl is saying, is the end of mimetic rivalry. I don't see you as my rival. I see you as my alter ego. You're my other self. You are who I am in another way. So Jesus puts those together, but at the same time, like everyone's saying, he unites it with the demand to love God with your whole heart. So loving God enables you, is what Sheila is saying, enables you to love the human other, who can be very, very, it can be your enemy, but at the same time, you're asked to love that enemy with that same love that you have for God. That pouring out of yourself that God evokes in you, because God is infinitely trustworthy, self-giving, beautiful, non-violent. And so I see this as, exactly, it's basically the same as what Cheryl says. This is a recipe for non-violence. The love, go ahead, Gail.
Well, I just want to say that there's an implicit triangle there with God, self, and neighbor.
Right.
It seems to me that there's a kind of dynamism that is replicating the idea of the Trinity, which
absolutely, you're absolutely, it's the same thing.
Yeah,
the same three-cornered essential relationship.
And why it should go so wrong when we try to live in community with each other, and it is really a mystery, because
But you, Gail, you told us about Teresa of Avila. She had these little communities and she made them work by her example.
She certainly did. It wasn't free from tension.
No.
At all.
Well, no, nothing human is, like.
No. But she did, in the sense, I think, that she really if you read her writings, you realize the humility with which she did that.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. You have to be the last of all, the servant of all, the one who loves, who's most eager in their practice of loving the other as yourself. I mean, you have to commit yourself. Somebody has to commit themselves to that full time, nothing held back, and then that models it to others, and they become more able to do it. You know, because it attracts. It's attractive. It's inherently attractive. You see someone else do it, you say, yes, that's the way to be. That's the way to do it. And so, but then, okay, so it's almost time to finish now. What is the last thing that the scribe echoes back to him? What he said, you've answered well. And then what does he say directly after, saying, you've answered well, Jesus. I like what you say. And he says,
There is only one God and no other.
no, but the very final bit of his statement, the scribe
You're not far from the kingdom of God.
That's what Jesus says to him. But what does the scribe say?
This
The
is
very
more
last bit.
important.
This
than
is
all
more
the burnt
important.
Burnt offerings.
So he completes the circle from the temple. You know, you're still in the temple. You're still deconstructing the temple. You've made the last argument against the temple.
Yeah. And the
And that's not there. Matthew leaves it out because Matthew and the others have lost some of the immediacy of the Markan drama in these last days of Jesus' life. And the fact that the scribe says that, you can hear the doors falling off their pivots in the temple. You can hear the pillars coming down and you don't need the temple anymore if you have that praxis of the triangle of love, as Gail was describing it, the three-cornered God, self, other. Because that you don't, what is their need? As the scribe says, why would you need burnt offerings after that? Why would you need that? It's redundant. And so this whole chapter 12 is a marvelous dialectic against the temple. A marvelous narrative. It's not just the action in the temple. It's all the underpinning and the contextual belief in the character of God and nature of God and the nature of power in the world, the Caesars, what Caesar stands for. It completely, I mean, you couldn't get a better program for a harmonious world. What Gail was talking about, the heavenly Jerusalem come to earth. You couldn't get a better program than what's carried in these highly charged verses of chapter 12, which are so beautiful, and which complete the closing down the temple. The temple gets closed down, let's say for half an hour and a half, whatever it was, when Jesus did stop the thoroughfare through the temple. But then the arguments and the descriptions that come afterwards complete. There's no going back. There's no return to the. So when the temple is destroyed in year 70, you could see how the Christians would have read it as the completion of Jesus' action. That he prophesied this, and this is what's going to happen. This is what happened, and so our message is one. But as Gail says, playing it out over so many centuries afterwards, we seem to have lost that thread. But thank God, because of, our brother René Girard and his insights and his story, we're getting back closer, I think, to what that means. You're going, Sheila.
Yes, they're coming to get me.
I hope that's not the police, is it? Huh?
God bless everyone. See you all.
God bless you. Well, let's finish with a prayer. Okay, then. God bless you. Would someone like to finish with a prayer, please? I would finish, but I'm talked out. I am. Dan, how about you praying for us?
Put him on the spot.
I know this man can pray, so I'm asking him to.
Gracious Lord, help us to take to heart the messages you've prepared for us this evening. Help us to learn to be your image in our communities of men and women, showing forth your love for us all, building relationships that are giving, generous, life-giving. And this we ask in Jesus' name, in confidence and gratefulness for your words of revelation and your words of love for us this evening.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Dan. God bless everyone. God, thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Andrew. Good to see you. Thank you, Claire and Heather and Dan and Gail. Peace.
Oh, just before, are we meeting next? We're going to meet on July 4th. It's Friday,
Yes.
next Friday.
Yes.
Tony and I
Yes.
will be here.
Yeah, I do not want to discriminate against the Canadians or the Australians.
No, I just wanted to clarify though, is it going to be an open mic or is it going to be just a Bible study?
We've had our open mic recently. We've still
We'll just do the Bible. We'll do the Bible study. Okay.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right then.
Peace.
Bye bye.